All right. Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Walter, and I'm the author of the book Tales in Somber Tones. The book is a short story collection that myself and artist Karen Ruffles started putting together over 2 years ago now, and have been working on turning into an inclusive modern art and literature project. We had originally planned a live touring show starting in the UK with access materials, readings, physical 3D prints, and the artwork that were designed to be touched and really just felt and experienced. But due to the world, you know, more or less being on fire, we've done our best to move to a more live streamed version for the time being. And that brings us to today. So today I'll be doing three stories, taking a short break, returning to read three more, and with the help of our sign language interpreters. And Karen is sitting by, waiting to answer any questions you might make in the comments during the live stream. Any comments you have for the end of the show, we can answer those as well. So a short note on the captions for the video. YouTube doesn't allow live captions for us at this point, but after the video is uploaded and trimmed, the captions will be available. So it'll probably be about 6 hours after the show ends. So likely the next day it should be good to go for you guys that need captions. As for images, I'll be reading an image description to aid those with low vision prior to each story. So, let us begin. First story is The Warmth of Illusion. The image is of an apple shown in different points in its timeline. The apple is whole, but a reflection being below shows it's partially eaten, with a ghostly transparent image of nothing but the core remaining. Birthdays are an old kind of magic. We light candles, we make wishes to the wax of our past years, then we let them burn, blow them out, sending the smoke away with our wish to the ether, hoping it will be accepted. But it doesn't need to be so literal. Birthdays have a magic all their own. Today was Xenia's birthday, but she had long ago stopped believing in magic. When the nights grew long and the warmth of day faded, she became more concerned with where her next scrap of food would come from, or if she would eat that day at all. The frost had come on quickly that year, and she had found herself without enough layers of clothing and too few friends. She shivered under a torn, discarded shipping blanket, and wondered if any of the warming shelters were open tonight, or if she could, possibly, beg enough money for a hot cup of tea. Someone walking down the sidewalk cleared their throat, but Xenia paid them no mind. Many people expected her to flee like a scared rat at the slightest provocation, but she stayed out of the way. The businesses were all closed at this hour, and she was always long gone by the time they opened in the morning. A pleasant, if slightly gruff voice spoke from the sidewalk. "Is that a dog under that pile of garbage? Or is this a person I've found?" Xenia looked up. A man stood before her wearing expensive shoes, dark slacks, and a large fur coat. He was just beginning to prepare a cigar, biting off the end and searching his numerous pockets for a lighter. "Woof," Xenia replied, then huddled back down. The man's laughter, she was sure, could be heard a mile away. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to have such a sense of humor. So many of you lose that quality over time," he said, still searching for a lighter. "What do you mean, so many of you?" Vagrants, of course. Or is it the needy these days? It's no longer acceptable to call you vagabonds, I know that much." It was true. Xenia had never been called a vagabond. The man gave up his incessant patting of his pockets and looked down at Xenia like he had just been caught stealing from a church collection plate. I don't suppose. Xenia rolled her eyes, producing a simple plastic lighter. She held it up as he bent down to light his cigar. As he held it in the flame, she spoke. "Now who's needy?" she said, putting the lighter away. The man smiled, blowing a ring of smoke into the air. "And you still have fight in you. Remarkable." Live my life for a month. Having some fight helps keep you alive." "Indeed," the man said, nodding. "Such is life. I bet you've never lost something you've really wanted without a fight." Xenia shrugged. "So, how did you end up out here, then?" the man continued. "I fought. I didn't claim to always win," Xenia replied. The man stood there for an uncomfortable length of time, smoking his cigar, looking her over. He pulled the cigar from his mouth and flicked it, sending a bright cascade of sparks out on the wind. "I may have a proposition for you," he said, finally, seemingly addressing the cigar. "I don't do that," Xenia replied, quickly. The man burst into laughter once again. "Oh, no, not that. If sex is what I were after, this would be an entirely different conversation." "Well, what then?" "What if I were to give you food, clothing, an apartment, amenities, and other various necessities for, say, a year?" Xenia raised an eyebrow at the man. "Are you mental?" she asked. The man smiled. "I'm completely in earnest. Would that be worth something to you?" Xenia thought of all the ways this could blow up in her face. If she might end up abducted, sold into slavery, killed, and then she thought of the cold nights ahead. "Okay, I'll bite. What's the catch? What do you want?" He inhaled in his cigar until the embers lit up his face in a deep orange glow, then blew out a thick cloud of noxious smoke. "Maybe I'm just generous," he said, smiling with the cigar in his teeth. "Bullshit. Nobody's that generous." The man laughed once more, coughing on the smoke in his mouth. "True, true. All right, I'll tell you." He knelt down in front of Xenia, his long coat dragging on the pavement. "I require something of yours. Something you don't even know you have. And something you'll never miss." Xenia stared at the man, waiting for him to continue, getting more annoyed by the second. The man smiled. "It's a fair trade, don't you think?" Xenia shook her head. "You haven't told me what you want yet." "Haven't I? Then let me be blunt. All I require of yours is a wish." "A wish?" Xenia scoffed. "What is it they call you rich madmen? Eccentric, isn't it?" The man stood up and shook his head. "I'm serious, Xenia. On your next birthday, all I require is the use of your wish." "Who told you my name?" "Doesn't matter." He took the cigar from his mouth and, without so much as flinching, put it out by grinding it into his own palm. "Now, I'm growing impatient. Last chance. Do we have a deal?" Xenia thought for a moment. She didn't trust this strange man, but she also didn't enjoy feeling like she owed anyone for anything. Then the wind blew, sending a shiver down her spine. The man smiled and held out his hand to her. She looked at it, looked at her torn shipping blanket, and then took his hand. The apartment, it turned out, was a small studio a few blocks from where they had met. The man opened a closet tucked behind an old Murphy bed. It was lined with various clothes in different styles and sizes. "Take what you want and get rid of the rest," he commanded. When she asked about food, he reached into one of his various pockets and produced a credit card. The name on it was Lorien, and it was from a bank she'd never heard of. She said as much to the man. "No, I suppose you wouldn't have, but it will be accepted anywhere. No computer will dare refuse it, and no cash machine either." The PIN number is your name." Xenia held the card tightly, as if it were a lifeline back to a familiar ship she never thought she'd see again. "Speaking of names, what's yours?" she asked. "You can call me Nos," he said. Xenia noticed he did not claim it was his name. "Any other questions?" "How do I get a hold of you? You know, if there's any problem or the landlord comes knocking." "You don't." He smiled at her, nodded his head slightly, then headed for the door. "I'll see you in a year," he said, and then he was gone, and Xenia was alone. The very first thing Xenia did was take a bath. It had been so long since she'd had a bath. She luxuriated in the water and suds. After, she went through the closet behind the bed, trying on this and that, separating them into piles of what she wanted and what she didn't. She got dressed in a sensible outfit of jeans and a sweater, keeping her own clothes folded on a chair, just in case this was some kind of cruel joke. She spent several long minutes staring at the credit card on the end table before she decided to try it out. She called a local pizza parlor and ordered something delivered to her. When they asked for the payment information, she gave them the numbers on the card. Then she held her breath, expecting the worst. She didn't relax until the pizza was delivered. She ate it slowly, savoring it, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it never came. She went to bed. As she covered herself in the thick, heavy blankets, she wondered how she could be so lucky. She ignored the tiny voice in the back of her mind, screaming for attention, telling her that something was wrong. That night, she slept as if she hadn't slept in years. Xenia lived the next few weeks like she was going to be caught stealing. She bought necessities, but only cheap ones, trying her best not to spend too much. As time went on, too much became a greater number, but it was never unreasonable. She never bought what she didn't need, and she never wasted anything if she could help it. One night, a few months after meeting Nos, Xenia was walking home from the store. She wondered, vaguely, when she began to think of the apartment as home, and she smiled to herself. Sitting on her building stairs was a young woman, no older than Xenia herself. She looked at Xenia, and Xenia recognized the expression. She had used it 1,000 times before. It was a pleading in the eyes, a sadness in her dark face, saying, "Please, don't make me move on." Xenia stopped and sat next to the woman, setting her groceries down. The young woman looked at her in confusion. "Still a bit cold at night these days, isn't it?" Xenia asked, staring at her feet. The woman nodded, slowly. "You know, I had to sleep with the window open for the first month that I had a place. I still can't sleep without fans blowing at me." She turned to the woman. "How long has it been since you slept indoors?" "A while," the woman said. "Never could get used to it." Xenia nodded. "You hungry?" The woman smiled. "Always," she said. "Great. Come with me then." Xenia grabbed her bags and headed inside. "We can leave the windows open." They went up to Xenia's apartment. The young woman stood in the doorway, peering in while Xenia set her bags down. She invited the woman in, told her to feel free to use the shower, have a nap, whatever she pleased, then set off to make dinner. It was only after dinner that the young woman spoke. "How did you get all this?" she asked. Xenia shrugged. "There was this man, and he made me an offer. He said that—" The young woman's eyes widened. "You made the deal, didn't you?" she breathed. Xenia blinked. "Wait, you know about him?" she asked. The woman nodded. "What did he get you for? Your favorite color? Your sense of justice?" "What? No. All he asked for was a birthday wish." "Girl," the woman said, accusingly, You should know when things are too good to be true. What is it? What's wrong with a stupid wish in exchange for all this? But her companion only shook her head in response. How long have you got before he comes to collect? 9 months or so, Xenia replied. The woman stood up. In that case, enjoy it while it lasts. She turned and walked out the door, leaving Xenia behind in the small studio apartment. Xenia's stress rose with each passing week. She had spent months trying to track down the young woman who seemed to know so much about Nos and his dealings, but none of her friends on the street knew who he was, and few ever saw him. Autumn had come once again, and as the days grew shorter, so did her patience. She kept traveling further and further from her local area, returning to the apartment less and less. Sleeping rough was easier, she found, when she knew that she had an option of returning home to a warm bed and full stomach. But she had to know what the woman knew. She had to find her. It was after returning from a week-long expedition to the south side that she finally saw Nos again. He was standing in her apartment when she walked in, smoking another of his horrendous cigars while he waited. He turned to her and smiled. I was beginning to get worried, he said, billowing smoke. When you hadn't been home for a week, nor been using your card, I thought the worst had happened. I'm sure, Xenia's voice was cold. What do you want? Is that any way to treat your benefactor? He shook his head and tisked. Manners these days. Why didn't you tell me the full story? Xenia stared at Nos, unblinking. But I did, child. I told you that you would get all of this for a year, and in exchange, I get your wish. What more did you need to know? Then why are people treating me like I just sold my soul? Nos held the cigar halfway to his lips and turned to Xenia. Who have you been talking to? He asked. Xenia balked. I'm not telling you anything until you explain to me why this is so important to you. Nos made a waving gesture with his hand. I'm just a nice guy, all right? A voice came from the doorway. No, you're really not. Nos winced at the voice. Ah, I see, he sighed. Hello, Mother. Xenia turned to the woman in the doorway, the same woman she had been searching for. Mother? She asked. The woman shrugged. It's complicated. Nos rolled his eyes. No, it isn't. You don't age. You only say that because I never have. What's this about? Xenia interrupted. They both looked at her. Nos shrugged. It's about wishes and dreams. And you, he said. His mother sighed. He's been at this for centuries. Every time he comes across a human in dire straits, he pounces. And once he has his claws in. Xenia looked at the woman, her dark hair woven together in an intricate pattern, her eyes almost yellow. Why did he need my wish? The woman smiled and turned to Nos. She looked at him lovingly as she spoke. He just doesn't have the capacity to do all of this himself. He can make dreams, control sleep, but he can't experience them himself. So every once in a while, he gets a human to wish him into a dream of his own. Nos shuffled his feet on the wooden floor, seeming smaller somehow. It's really not a bad deal, you know. I mean, you did get an extra year, just like I said. Does it matter if that year was only a dream? This is a dream? Xenia looked about the room, taking it all in. No, this is real. This is life. Nos's mother smiled and shook her head. You've been asleep since before you met Nos. I've been asleep for almost a year? Nos laughed. No, of course not. An hour at best. But to you, it certainly felt like a year, didn't it? So, I'm still out there? In the cold? With nothing but a shipping blanket to... The implication dawned on her all at once. I'm going to die. Nos nodded. Not too much longer now. Well, wake me up! I've got to get warm, find shelter, something! It's too late for that now. It was too late before we even began, Nos explained. People in dire straits, remember? Xenia stared at him. So what do I do now? Nos's mother stepped forward and put her arm around Xenia's shoulders. You've got a couple weeks left, dear. It's your dream. You can do whatever you damn well please, she said, and smiled. Nos won't interfere anymore, will you, Nos? Nos shook his head. It wouldn't work now anyway. Can't control a conscious mind, he said, shifting his cigar to the other side of his mouth. Anything you want, anything at all. It's your time. Use it wisely. He stepped out of the room, and Xenia was suddenly sure that he was gone from her world for good. The young woman hugged her. Have a blast, she said, then left as well. So Xenia was alone in her dream. She looked around the small studio apartment. Complete control, she said to herself, flexing her fingers. For the next few weeks, at least. And she took advantage of every second of it. The next day, the coroner patiently verified that this young woman was dead. The passerby who called about the body was hanging back, morbidly curious. Why is she smiling? He asked. The coroner shrugged. The cold takes them like that, sometimes, he said. All right, our next story is Hunted. The image shows the 199 steps of Whitby at night. A moon shows through the thick cloud covering. Near to the top of the steps, the bar guest, a massive wolf-like creature, can be seen in shadow splayed against the cliff wall. How long do you think it will take you to come up with the money? The man asked, straightening his tie, oozing pleasantness and camaraderie like a used car salesman. I don't know, Mr. Chance. After the shop was forced to close, and with jobs being so scarce in these parts... Mr. Chance nodded. He knew the story. They had told it to him 3 times today already, every time he asked a direct question about the status of the owed funds. The debtor, who currently leased this flat from Mr. Chance's firm, his name had eroded with Mr. Chance's patience, continued to give his apologies and his excuses while fidgeting with an empty coffee cup. Mr. Chance ignored him, instead looking at his own. The bitter brew, cold now for an hour or more, sat undisturbed, the milk he had poured out of habit forming a circle of white film in the center. He wondered if he should drink it now, if only for the look of the thing, but decided accepting even this small bit of gracious hosting would only give the debtor the wrong impression. Instead, he looked around the room. He sneered internally at the commonplace furniture and low-cost food items visible on the kitchen counters. Why does this town always smell of mold? He thought, sniffing the air and stifling a cough. Something in the conversation caught his attention. I'm sorry, what was that? He asked. I said, that is, I wanted to know if we could have a 2-month deferment on the rent, just until we can sell off the old inventory and I can find a job. Mr. Chance's plastic smile froze in place. And what kind of guarantee could we expect to receive for this generous extension? He asked, already knowing the answer. I don't know, the debtor breathed, defeated. Mr. Chance closed his eyes and nodded solemnly. He formed what he thought of as a pitiable frown and looked at the debtor. I'm afraid we can't do that sort of thing, Mr. Chance lied. Not without collateral. If we did it for you, we would have to do it for everyone who asked. And then where would we be? He stood up from the kitchen table and gathered his papers and copies of contracts into a leather satchel. You and your family have the agreed upon 14 days left to vacate the premises. He turned to leave, but paused when he caught sight of two children standing in the living room. He replaced his plastic smile and grinned at them, halfway bowing as they looked on. Then he opened the door and left. The wind blew in from the north, bringing with it the scent of the sea and a promise of the coming storm. Mr. Chance turned his collar up and clasped his coat closed as he walked downhill toward the swing bridge and, eventually, to his hotel on the other side. A crescent moon peeked down at him through the clouds as he marched along. He cursed under his breath at the cobblestones that tripped him outside of a local pub. The scent of stout beer and the ghosts of past roll-ups greeted him like an old friend, enticing him to enter, but he growled and stomped on. The wind picked up and howled down the yards and walkways, through his too thin coat and to his very soul. He shivered in the darkness. The streets were deserted, his lonely footsteps his only company. He made his way down thin streets and listened to the echoes of his breathing in the darkened shop windows as he passed. Finally the street opened up, and there below him lay the swing bridge, shrouded in a thin mist from the inlet it spanned. The wind, so fierce further up the hill, was oddly still down here, but Mr. Chance paid it no mind. He smiled at the prospect of a warm shower that awaited him on the other side, the possibility of food and, perhaps, some company for the evening. The air was colder and completely calm near to the water. The mist deadened all sound, making his footsteps seem as if they were coming from another world altogether, and even the slip of moon seemed to abandon him as he started his way across. He shivered. Nearby, he thought he heard something odd, a low, rolling, chilling sound that made his stomach lurch with ancestral dread. Humanity had known that sound since the dawn of the species, and had learned long ago to flee from it. Mr. Chance raced across the bridge and down the nearby street toward his hotel. The mist began to thin. Here and there, in the lit windows above his head, he saw the unmistakable presence of humanity. Feeling foolish, he slowed to a walk once more, glancing over his shoulder to make sure nobody had noticed his moment of panic. There, shrouded in the mist, something waited. He couldn't quite make it out. A snarl of fur here, a massive paw there, but he was absolutely sure it was watching him. Fear stole his tongue as well as his legs, and he stood there motionless, staring at the creature who stared back at him. An unwelcome and unfamiliar thought came to his mind. You are weak. You are pathetic. You are prey. The wind blew once more, blowing a bit of sand into Mr. Chance's eyes. He quickly rubbed at them to clear his vision, but when he could see once more, the creature was gone. Forgetting all pretense of dignity or embarrassment, he turned and ran to his hotel. He ran through the door to the common area, down the hallway, through the door to his room, and bolted it behind him. He took several deep, unsteady breaths, leaning on the closed door, sweating despite the cold. His window was open, and he rushed across the room to close it. Blowing on the wind, he thought he heard a snarl that he hoped was just the boats grinding against the quayside. He slammed the window shut, and a thought intruded on his reality once again. Be better, prey. The next day, Mr. Chance took a cab from the hotel to the train station, and from there he began to breathe easier as the scent of salt water faded into the distance. By the time he reached his hometown, he had made up his mind that nothing out of the ordinary had happened the previous night. Years passed. Mr. Chance progressed in his career with his firm, outperforming his co-workers year after year in profits and acquisitions. Finally, he was promoted to run his own branch of the company. He was offered a position on the north coast, but he begged and pleaded with those in power, and got a position further inland instead. Months went by, and he exceeded the expectations of the board in every way imaginable. One day, he received a call from the branch at the coast. The manager there had taken ill suddenly, and he was needed to cover the day-to-day operations until she was back on her feet. Try as he might, he could do nothing to escape the assignment. Either he went, or he would be finding a new job. And the next weekend, his heart in his throat, he took the train back to the northern coast. To his pleasant surprise, the days passed without incident, though he always made damn sure to be back in his room before the sun set. His final day covering the branch was drawing to a close. He had spent 14 days in the coastal town without so much as a minor headache, and he was looking forward to the train ride home in the morning. He closed and locked the office behind him, dropped the keys to the mail slot as he was asked to do, then began the now familiar walk to his hotel. The sun wasn't yet low in the sky, and the day was warm and pleasant for fall, so he took another route. He strolled along the old streets and glanced in shop windows, playing tourist as much as he was able. Finally, he walked by a small pub. Well, why not? He thought, and went in. He sat himself in an uncomfortable corner with a cool pint and took in the local color, silently judging people whom he considered too far gone from all that was real and immediate in his world. With the second pint, he found himself beginning to laugh at conversations in which he wasn't involved. By his fourth pint, he was arguing politics with two elderly locals. His seventh pint found him alone once more, grinning at the suddenly charming and comfortable surroundings. He hadn't realized how much stress he had really been under, and he sighed happily with the knowledge that tomorrow it would all be over. "Hello, Mr. Chance," a familiar voice interrupted. Mr. Chance turned. There, smiling wide, stood the same man who had pleaded with him years before about the rent. Mr. Chance stammered. "Enjoying yourself?" the man asked. Mr. Chance struggled to remember the man's name, but the information was swimming against the flow of beer, and he simply couldn't. Yes, in fact," replied Mr. Chance, regaining what he thought of as his professional demeanor, the whole effect ruined by him spilling the remains of his pint on the table as he straightened. The man was undisturbed. "I'm very glad to hear that. I always like to hear patrons are enjoying themselves in my pub." Mr. Chance froze. "Your pub?" "Oh, yes. After you and your firm kicked my family out on the streets, the former owner gave us a place upstairs to stay. To pay him back for his generosity, I took up tending bar. As it turns out, I'm quite an able host and bartender, and upon the owner's death, he left this place to me." There was a deadly joy in his voice. Mr. Chance cleared his throat. Well, congratulations. It's a wonderful pub. Very nice walls. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to pay my tab and go." He stood up, but the owner moved into his path. "Pay your tab? Why, Mr. Chance, you once didn't think I was worthy of lending money to, and now you're running tabs at my pub? Tell me, did you give any collateral for your drinks?" "What? No, Of course not, Mr. Chance. I think I don't want your money. In fact, I don't think I'll ever want your money, nor you, in my establishment ever again." He stood aside and held an arm out towards the door, still smiling. "Good evening, Mr. Chance, and goodbye," he finished. Mr. Chance pretended he didn't see the bemused faces of all the other patrons in the bar as he walked out the door, nor hear the following calls and insults. The door slammed behind him, and all he could hear was uproarious laughter from within. He kicked the stone wall of the building as he passed, and swore under his breath. He was angry, more than a little drunk, and so he didn't notice when he began walking in the wrong direction. By the time he realized, it was too late. The sun was setting. He wandered in what he could only assume was the right direction, turning this way and that through the city's winding streets. Eventually he came to a small turn and a sign that said simply, Argument's Yard. He leaned against the wall, resolute that he would ask the next person he saw for directions to his hotel. He sighed at the empty street and continued on his way. Turning a corner, he spotted something just up the road. It could only be a very large, very ragged dog, black and strong and long-haired, and it was watching him. He saw the familiar sign of his hotel directly behind the beast, as if it knew, as if it was waiting for him. Mr. Chance backed away slowly, turning the corner once more before bursting into a sprint. He had his bearings now, and knew his way back to the office. Surely he could find a place in there to rest. He could lock the door behind him, and the keys! He remembered now. He would find no shelter there. Quickly ducking into a yard, he stopped running. Slowly, he peered around the corner, back the way he had come. The street was deserted. The pub, he thought. I'll just go back there and beg his forgiveness, offer him a fortune for his troubles, if only he'll take me in for the night. Surely he wouldn't turn me down. He turned to continue on his way and nearly ran into the beast that sat there, falling back onto the cobbles. The creature cocked its head at Mr. Chance, as if it were perplexed or amused. Even seated, the beast stood more than a head taller than Mr. Chance, and he wondered if the beer had gotten to his senses. The beast, calm and controlled, closed its yellow eyes and sniffed at the air, following the scent, moving closer to Mr. Chance's face, inhaling his breath with one long drag. Its eyes snapped open, and Mr. Chance felt more naked than if his essence were ground, strained, filtered, and examined by a panel of angry gods. Pray, came the unbidden thought, and the creature seemed to grow ever larger with each breath it stole from Mr. Chance's lungs. Its long, tangled fur bristled, and it growled, slow and deadly, like the death of light. Mr. Chance scrambled back on his hands and stood already in mid-run, heading deeper into the yard as the hound advanced on him with cruel and inevitable intent. He tried to scream, but his voice came out as a strangled squeak. He could feel the weight of misery in his life. All of the pain, the fear, the anguish he had caused pulled him down like an anchor, and he fell hard on the cobblestones, but still he retreated. He turned, and the beast was upon him. His entire reality seemed to be filled with fur and teeth and the smell of decay. The hound leapt, and Mr. Chance closed his eyes. "Hey, mister, are you okay?" The voice was pleasant and young, and came from behind him. "What?" he asked, keeping his eyes closed. "I said, are you okay? Did you hurt yourself?" Mr. Chance turned and saw a young woman standing in an open doorway, cigarette and lighter at the ready. I... He scrambled to his feet and darted his eyes in every direction. "Did you see it?" he asked. "See what?" "The creature! Did you see it?" The young woman glared at him. Maybe a few less pints next time, yeah?" she said, mumbling insults as she closed the door. Mr. Chance was alone, and he ran. He ran out of the yard. He ran down the street. And as he ran, he thought of his escape. "I can't go to my hotel. That thing knows where it is. How did that damn demon find me? How can I hide from it?" He turned and found himself standing in front of a great series of steps. At the top, basking in the moonlight, he saw the outline of an old church. "Holy ground," he whispered, smiled to himself, and began to climb. His legs ached, and on he climbed. His lungs threatened to burst, and on he climbed. He threw his legs upward and forward into the darkness, whether he saw the next step or not. He was seeing spots as he crested the last stair. He collapsed onto the ground, coughing and wheezing, gulping in the cool night air. He looked up and saw the church, and a smile spread across his face. Holy ground. He had made it. He was safe. He was sure that he was safe. The next morning, the people of Church Street were shocked to see the body of a man in a torn and tattered business suit lying at the base of the steps. One of them recognized him as a drunken fool who had been ranting at her the night before, and everyone soon concluded that, drunk and unbalanced, he had fallen to his death down all 199 steps. As for the strange cuts and gashes on his body, well, some of those steps are sharp, aren't they? And if anyone noticed the strands of black fur matted into his bloodied flesh, or the unmistakable scent of sulfur in the air, nobody said a single word about it. Excellent. Okay, the next story is Name Your Poison. The image shows a set of two coins, one British and the other ancient Roman. The British coin is new, shiny and pristine, while the Roman coin is old and corroded with time. The reflections show their situation reversed, with the British coin being corroded and old, and the Roman coin new again. There are places in the world unlike any other. Places that have exactly what it is you're looking for that day, that very moment, and it is always the perfect thing. Sometimes these places are curio shops, with their random collections of oddities and hidden treasures, and sometimes they're cafes, serving local arts and crafts along with coffee, tea, and finger foods. Silenus ran a pub, which he had named after himself as a matter of course. A man entered the dark, empty room right at sunset and took a place at the bar. Silenus smiled into the face not unlike a storm cloud. "Having a bad day?" he asked, jovially. "A bad life is more like it," the man replied. "Give me a beer." Silenus cocked his head toward the man. "But you don't want a beer," he said, turning to a shelf full of dusty bottles behind him. He selected one, rubbed at the label, smiled, and uncorked it. "Now this is what you're looking for." He poured the thin red liquid into a metal goblet that he had produced from under the bar. The customer eyed the goblet, confused. "It helps the flavor," Silenus encouraged. "What is it?" the customer asked. Just an old Roman wine," Silenus said, corking the bottle up once again. "Try it. I promise you'll enjoy it." The customer picked up the goblet carefully, sniffing at the contents. He made a face at Silenus, who only laughed. "Trust me," he said. "I'd hardly get anywhere poisoning my customers, now would I?" The customer took a drink, and it was as if the wine had put out an inferno within him. His muscles unknotted themselves, his jaw unclenched, and the pain that had been a part of him for so long that he no longer remembered that it was there or where it had come from, was suddenly gone. He looked at Silenus, his mouth agape. "That," he paused, turning this way and that, looking for anyone who might overhear. "That tastes like summer. It tastes as good as sleep feels. He took another sip. "It tastes like the innocence of childhood." Silenus nodded. "Told you you'd like it," he said, putting the bottle away. The man pushed the drink away, his face suddenly full of panic. "There's no way I could afford something like this," he breathed. Silenus laughed and pushed the goblet back toward the man. "You've already paid," he said, putting the cork on a small vial of cloudy purple liquid. The man looked at the goblet, then up to Silenus, then carried the goblet to a nearby table. Silenus nodded at the man's back, then wrote "Despair" on the label and stuck it to the bottle. The night carried on in much the same way. The usual crowd of people looking for stout happiness shuffled in with the stranger people who always craved unfiltered sorrow. One woman wanted a high-proof rage, a middle-aged man wanted concentrated time, and an elderly gentleman surprised Silenus by knowing exactly what he wanted: a first kiss with water to make it last. It was getting toward closing, and the regulars were staggering out in various states of elation or horror. Silenus took the inventory of his receipts for the night, admiring a particularly potent nightmare he had obtained from a rather strange man, who had traded it for a tea made from an Egyptian mummy. A woman walked in just as Silenus was about to lock the doors. "Are you closed?" she asked, sweetly. "Madam, Silenus has never turned away anyone who was able to make it over the threshold." He ushered the woman in, but turned over the open placard to show closed to the outside world. He escorted her to a seat at the bar, then proceeded behind it as the woman looked around the empty room. "If this is a bad time, I can come again tomorrow," she offered. But Silenus waved her off and shook his head. "Nonsense! Why come back when you're already here? Now then, what can I get you?" The woman looked along the rows upon rows of bottles, some new, some dusty and faded, and some chained down, gently rattling. She swore one was looking back at her. "I am afraid I'm not sure," she replied. Silenus smiled. "Oh, that's no problem. I can—" He stopped, tilting his head to one side. "No, I guess I can't at that. You really don't know what you want, do you?" "I did tell you as much," she sighed. Silenus' smile widened. "Dear lady, you have no idea what a distinct pleasure it is to meet someone who truly doesn't know what they want." He excitedly began to grab bottles and concoctions, spirits both real and imagined, and pile them all in his work area. "Now I really get to show you my skill." His hands moved with inhuman speed over the assembled ingredients, taking a short pour of one, a drop of another, tipping them all into a thin metal shaker. He used a pair of long pliers to take a distorted and twisted bottle full of black liquid down from the shelf above his head. He set the bottle, unopened, next to the shaker. After several seconds, he grabbed the shaker, tossed a small cold stone into it, slammed a pint glass on top to seal it, and started shaking. He counted aloud to 7, and then cracked open the shaker and poured the strangely green and blue striped substance into a martini glass. He tore a sprig of rosemary from a collection of plants nearby and laid it in the glass before presenting it to the woman. She looked at it, unsure, then looked to Silenus, silently questioning. "Oh, it's something I haven't made in years. One of my old pupils used to absolutely love it." "What's it called?" she asked, looking at the colors swirling together and coming apart in the glass. "Ambrosia." The woman lifted the glass to her lips and sipped at it. It tasted like unpracticed love, sweet and pleasant as it entered her mouth, but turning almost foul as the flavor lingered. She sat the glass down once again. "It's good, but not quite what I was looking for," she said. Silenus was stunned. He hadn't had a reaction like that one to one of his drinks in eons. But he soon regained his composure and shrugged. "It's not for everyone." He stroked his thin beard for a moment, then snapped his fingers and set to work on another mixture. He moved this way and that, mixing one ingredient into another, pouring that into a larger glass, then stirring it. He took a vegetable peeler and shaved a piece of cloud he kept in a jar in the fridge, then piled spices on top of it, sinking the cloud to the bottom of the glass. The finished drink was perfectly clear and seemed to glow from within. He transferred it to a highball glass and put a silver bendy straw into it. The woman sipped on the straw and immediately made a face. "And what do you call this?" she asked, pushing it away. Silenus sighed. "Life. And you have my condolences." He shook his head. "Perhaps you're in the mood for something a little darker?" The woman shrugged, folding her hands together and resting her chin upon them, her elbows on the bar. She sat in that bar stool for hours, watching him create one strange concoction after another, a froth of tea from the leaves of Yggdrasil, beer from the court of Tutankhamun, mixed with the souls of murderers, spiced wine from the gardens of Babylon, condensed sex thinned with the blood of Julius Caesar, and each time she was unsatisfied. Growing desperate, Silenus broke into his special stock, apple cider from the Tree of Knowledge, heated with magma from Vesuvius, a banana shake topped with the tears of Eric the Red, a double shot of pure, unrestricted lust, and an odd combination of things that seemed to scream to her very soul as she drank that he called the past that never was. Still she sat there, perched on her stool, unmoved in body or spirit. Silenus shook his head. The only other drinks I have are deadly poisonous to humans, I'm afraid. She lifted an eyebrow. Really? That would be interesting. Give me one of those, she said. Silenus stared at the woman. Miss, I really do mean it. 5 seconds, maybe 10, and you'll no longer be among the living. Is that really something you want? Oh, we'll see, won't we? Silenus hesitated for just a moment. He had never refused a customer before, not for anything, but then he'd never been asked to kill one, either. He sighed. As you wish, he said, and went to work. He started with a base of cyanide, delightful to smell, but bitter to taste. He added a mixture of guava and honey to it. From there, he muddled some mint and asp venom together with limes, then topped it with a shot of moonshine. Finally, he stepped back into the racks and shelves behind the bar and grabbed a small vial. He returned and unsealed the wax from around the cork, punctured the top with a needle, and turned it upside down. A single drop of a thick, dark substance slipped from the needle and into the mixture. What's that? The woman asked. Silenus huffed. Madam, he said, that's death. He smiled at her oddly curious expression. He poured the murky mixture into a pint glass, rimmed with arsenic powder, then added a lime wedge to the rim. He stepped back and looked at it. Then he snapped his fingers and added the carapace of a black widow to the liquid and watched it sink to the bottom of the glass. He slid the drink over to the woman, stepped back, and waited. The woman stirred the drink with her finger, knocking the lime into the glass. She wiped her fingers on her pants, picked up the glass, and drank. She paused for a moment, licked her lips, then turned to Silenus. She opened her mouth to speak, and then fell backward off her stool. Silenus rubbed his temples with his hands, wondering how to get rid of a body at this time of night, and who might owe him that kind of favor. He went around the bar to collect the body, and looked down at the woman with pity. I did warn you, he said. The body blinked once, twice, and then sat up. My compliments, the woman said, plainly. I think that was exactly what I needed. She smiled at Silenus. It's funny, she continued, as her hair began to gray and fall from her head. I had come here for completely different reasons. I was going about my business, you know. Night is always a busy time for me. She stood up and brushed off her pants. The skin from her hands stayed on the cloth, and she sighed. Maybe I should take breaks more often. It's really been a long time. The flesh dripped down her face like candle wax, pooling on her shirt collar. Her eyes receded into her head, and all that was left was a grinning skull. She held out a skeletal hand, and as Silenus shook it, with the same sweet voice, she thanked him for his time. You really are a wonderful host, she added, then turned away and walked out the door. Silenus stood there for a moment, dumbfounded, as he watched the bits of skin and blood on his floor evaporate in streams of smoke. He locked the door behind his guest, then went behind the bar to collect his payment. He put a cork in the bottle of shimmering, shifting gray liquid, then wrote on a small label, Death's Indecision, and put it on the shelf. wondering what new drinks he could make with that. Okay, so we are going to take a short break. We should be back in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, so hang tight, and we will be back shortly. And we're back. Okay, where were we? There we go. So, the next story is To Spite the Living. The image shows a graveyard in the snow. Several grave markers dot along the centuries-old wall. Sitting upon one of the grave markers is a woman, though she is semi-transparent, and the gravestone and wall can be seen through her. Behind her, even more transparent than she is, stands a pair of leathery wings. It was unseasonably warm that day in the north of England. People flocked to the streets and stores in t-shirts and trousers. Some of them put on their spring dresses, even though it was only February, and moved about the crowds like spots of light in a gray world. The churchyard, by contrast, was quiet and calm. William had always loved old churchyards. It was something about the look, desolation kept with care, that struck a chord with him. All across the United Kingdom, he had visited old churchyards and ruins, sat in them a while, explored the grounds, and, if at all possible, took souvenirs home with him. He was not a grave robber. At least, he never thought of himself as one, although he had collected the odd bit of bone or piece of statue from time to time while on his adventures. A finger joint here, a bit of rib there, things so small as to not be missed unless you were looking for them. And if he had to pay the occasional caretaker a little extra for them, then so be it. He was a collector, and hobbies cost money. William paced back and forth along a row of ancient headstones. The names, once cut so deeply into them, were now shallow and hard to read among the dried moss and lichen. His contact was late. He had been waiting for over an hour, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, pacing, and was quickly getting fed up. He kicked at a stone in the grass and sent it flying into a tombstone, where it hit with a hollow, light sound. Curious, he went over to it, looked around, then bent over to pick it up. What he had kicked turned out not to be a rock at all, but an old, thin bit of bone. He inspected it closely, but try as he might, he couldn't identify its origin. Someone behind him coughed, and he spun around while holding his new treasure out of sight. Sitting on a wide tomb a few rows back from the older graves sat a woman in a simple dress, her leg over her knee, smiling at him. "I'd put it back if I were you," she said, no malice at all in her tone. "Put what back?" William replied, playing dumb. "Well, darling," the woman started, tilting her head to the side, "if you can't sort that out for yourself, then I really can't help you." William stared at her for several seconds, trying his best not to show the rising panic he felt. The woman never stopped smiling at him, as if she were having a private joke. Finally, William cleared his throat. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. I have nothing," he said, then put the piece of bone in his pocket and walked away. As he was passing through the churchyard gates, he thought he heard laughter from a long way off. But when he turned around, the woman was gone. It was a several-hour drive back to his home, and night had fallen by the time William stepped through his door. He took his new prize out of his pocket and placed it on the dining room table. Looking at it in the light, he wondered if it might have been an animal bone of some kind. "Look who's talking, ape," a voice called out. William nearly jumped out of his skin. He ran through the house with a fire poker in his hand, trying to locate the intruder. He looked everywhere, but he was alone. He sat down at the table once again, sweating from fear and surprise, thinking he had imagined the voice he heard. "You're not that clever," the voice announced. "Who's there?" William shouted, poker at the ready. A deep, throaty laughter was all that it replied. William sat in silence for several minutes, trying his best not to freak out. "Am I going mad?" he thought. "You're already mad, Willie. You steal bones for fun, you daft bastard." The voice was confident, amused. "How do you know my name?" William asked. "It's all over your mail," replied the voice. William swallowed in a dry throat. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Oh, a game! It's been so long since I've had a game. All right, you guess, and I'll tell you if you're warm or cold." "What?" "You want to know where I am? Those are my terms." William stood up, keeping his makeshift weapon with him, and peered into the kitchen. "Oh, cold, Willie. Ice cold. Antarctic." William growled under his breath. He hated being called Willie. He made his way down the hallway and toward his bedroom. "You're on Pluto now," the voice called out, but it was no quieter. William went into the bathroom and used the poker to open the shower curtain. "Honestly, Ape, it's like you're not even trying." "This is a ridiculous game," William shouted. "If you had asked me my name, we could be playing charades," the voice replied. William rolled his eyes and went back to the dining room table. "This prank isn't funny," he announced. "Warmer," teased the voice. William frowned, then peered under the table. The voice started laughing. "You really are bad at this," it said. "Just tell me where you are, you bastard!" The voice was silent for a moment, then said, "I am exactly where you put me." "Excuse me?" "By all the veil, you are thick, aren't you? Honestly, Willie, no wonder you live alone." William's eyes dropped to the table and the piece of bone sitting there. "By the gods! Realization finally dawns for the idiot," the voice teased, laughing. William shook his head. "I'm calling the police," he said, getting out his cell phone. "Oh, yes, that will go so very well. Hello, police," the voice mocked. "There's a bone I stole from the churchyard, and it won't stop pointing out what I'm an absolute git I am." "That's bound to work. I'll just wait for them to come and drag me away, shall I?" William paused, then hung up the phone. "What do you want?" The voice laughed in delight. "Oh, we get to play charades after all." William sat, unmoved, and didn't reply. "Aw, are we no longer playing, Willie?" the voice goaded. "You might be, but I'm not. This is absurd," says the man who collects cold calcium deposits. Obviously a font of sanity you are. "A lot of people have hobbies," William shouted at the bone fragment. He couldn't see it, but William had the distinct impression that should the bone fragments have had eyes, it would have rolled them. The voice sighed. "You're almost too easy," it said. "What game shall we play now?" "I told you," William replied. "I'm not playing." "Are you a betting man, William?" "What?" "Do you gamble, take chances, risk losing something in order to gain something more?" "What does that have to do with anything?" William growled. Look, when a sentient piece of bone that's sitting on your table asks you a question, you bloody well humor it. Got it?" "I don't have to. This might not even be happening." "Oh. You mean you might be asleep?" the voice asked, a dangerous edge to its tone. "Yeah, or hallucinating, or something." William sat back, exasperated. There was silence for a moment. Then, "You're right," the voice said. "You might be dreaming. We should wake you up." William woke up just as his car went over the edge of a cliff, bursting through the guardrail without even slowing down. He was weightless, hitting his head on the roof of his car as he sailed downward towards the churning ocean and jagged, unforgiving rocks. He screamed. He was back at his table once more. The voice was laughing. "Are you awake now?" it asked, amused. "That doesn't prove anything," William shouted. The voice sighed, and then William punched himself in the groin. He shouted in surprise at the altogether alien feeling of losing control of his own limb. Through the haze of pain, he heard the voice ask, "And how about now? Still dreaming?" "What the hell was that?" William screamed. "What?" William flung his own shin into the table leg. "That? Are you really that thick? How are you doing that?" "We possess certain powers, Abe. Even in death. Controlling weak-willed individuals is hardly a challenge." "We?" The voice chuckled. "Dragons," it said. "Dragons don't exist," William said. His hand jumped up and grabbed hold of the top of his own ear. "Do you know how much force it takes to remove a human ear?" the dragon asked. "Only a few pounds. Normally, the pain keeps you from even getting close to that point. Your body simply won't let you. However, since I can't feel it..." William screamed as his ear slowly peeled away from his skull. He stared, helpless, at the lump of flesh pinched in fingers he could no longer control. "Does it bounce, do you think?" asked the dragon, as William involuntarily threw his detached ear at the table. "It does! Wonderful!" I need," William breathed, "to stop insulting the creature who is only keeping you alive for its own amusement. I agree." He tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. He tried to reach out and throw the bone out the window, but didn't even manage to lift his finger. William swallowed in a dry throat, resigned to his fate. "What do you want?" he asked. "Oh, Willie boy, we're just getting started." A crash came from William's study. One by one, he watched as his treasure collection rolled, clattered, and crawled its way into the dining room. The bits and pieces of bone and stone combined together into a grotesque mockery of William himself. The collection moved forward and pulled him to his feet by his collar. In 1,000 dead, hollow voices, it shrieked at him. Suddenly it went dark, and William was surrounded with the stench of rotting meat, bile, and just a hint of sulfur. He managed to turn his head to see the shadow of enormous teeth clamped shut in front of his eyes, and he wept. "Have you been naughty, sweetie?" asked a woman's voice from outside the darkness. William didn't know how long he'd been there, but the voice sounded oddly familiar. "He started it," the dragon replied. "Well, yes, but he's an idiot, whereas you are very wise. Isn't that how we came to our arrangement?" The voice grumbled and growled. "That was a long time ago. Things change," it said. The woman's tone was gentle and soothing. "Come back with me, darling. Leave this fool to his misery." "I don't want to. I have plans for this one." "Don't make me banish you," the woman teased. The dragon growled. "You got lucky the first time, witch," it said, but the fight was out of it. "Maybe, but once was all it took." William opened his eyes. He was sat at his table, his head down. He lifted his head and gasped as the scab on the side of his head peeled away, still stuck to the table. Across from him, holding the dragon bone fragment, sat the woman from the churchyard. She smiled at William. "I did warn you, dear," she said. sweetly. You did all of this, didn't you? William jumped up, pushing his chair to the floor, and was about to dive at the woman when he froze. Gripped in the woman's other hand was the hilt of a sword, which had a blade so impossibly thin as to be nearly unseen, the tip of which was pressed, lightly but assuredly, against William's throat. "He really is a git, isn't he?" the woman asked. "It's almost impressive," the dragon replied. "I'm keeping his ear, just so you know." The woman withdrew, and somehow hid the blade with a flick of her wrist. William staggered backwards, falling over his own chair. "Suits me," the woman said, smiling again. She tilted her head to one side. "Well, darling, maybe this will teach you a lesson, and I would get that wound looked at if I were you." She leaned forward, putting her hand up to her mouth. "It's starting to smell," she whispered. And with that, she turned and left. The next day, William stood in the churchyard once again, a bandage wrapped around his head. He paced up and down the graves and tombs, one after the other, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, gibbering to himself about the kidnappers and hidden speakers. Unseen, a few graves over, a woman and a dragon watched. The woman shook her head in disappointment, then scratched the dragon under the chin, shrugged at it, and smiled as they both faded into the mist. Okay, our next story is Don't Look. The image shows a round tabletop makeup mirror. In the mirror's reflection is a hairbrush, being gripped in the sharp, inhuman talons of an unseen creature. The streets were a dangerous place, it seemed. Every day, Michael heard of a new mugging or robbery, a new rape or murder in the alleys and streets that he frequented. Looking around tonight, half drunk and amused, Michael wandered between the local bars. He turned down a street and narrowly avoided running into a man who stood in the middle of the sidewalk. Instead, he sidestepped into a signpost. Michael picked himself up off the ground, with effort, his alcohol consumption finally making itself known, and turned to the man he had almost ran down. He was about to scream at him, but something in the man's face made him pause. The man wasn't looking at him. He was looking, unblinkingly, over Michael's shoulder. The stranger's eyes were red-rimmed. They twitched with the effort of remaining open, and they were absolutely filled with terror. Curiosity getting the better of him, Michael tried to turn to see what the stranger was looking at. Then the man's hand was around Michael's throat. The stranger pulled him close to his chest, the scent of his unwashed body filling Michael's senses. The man's chapped lips brushed against Michael's ear as he whispered in a half-maddened tone, "Don't look behind you." Michael pried the stranger's hand from his throat and stepped away from him. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed. But again, the stranger wasn't looking at him. "Don't worry. You aren't in any danger. Not yet, at least. You'll be fine. Just, for the love of all that you hold dear, don't look behind you." Michael paused, looking over the stranger. His eyes were fixed. His jaw was set. He was serious. Michael swiveled his eyes to look to his side, trying to catch sight of whatever was behind him in his periphery, but it was no use. He stood there for several moments, unsure of what to do. If I move, he'll attack me again, but what's to stop him if I stay? He tried once more to turn his head. At the corner of his eye, he could have sworn he saw a strange, clawed arm. Then the stranger's hand turned Michael back once again. "Don't," he said, simply. While Michael debated with himself The stranger cleared his throat. He rubbed his stubbled chin with a dirty, scarred hand, and then began to speak, as if he had been asked. I knew a boy once, and he was scared. Scared of the dark, scared of loud noises, scared of small creatures and great. Most of all, he was scared of what was hiding under the bed. He knew, as only children know, that there was something other under the bed, patiently waiting for him to make a mistake. He dare not leave his feet uncovered, nor would he lay with his hands over the edge of the mattress, but what he couldn't resist was sleep. Oh, how he struggled against sleep. For whenever he closed his eyes, he would hear gentle breathing from beneath the bed, like the ebb and flow of ocean waves. For months, he dreaded the ritual of bedtime, hated brushing his teeth, despised his nightly bath, couldn't bear the words good night. Until one night, perhaps driven mad by exhaustion or driven to bravery by soul-gripping terror, he decided he'd had enough. He was going to meet the creature under the bed. Michael was awestruck. He was half drunk, slightly bruised, and being told a bedtime story by a madman. And yet, he wanted to know more. The night was warm and comfortable. Street lights illuminated his blinds, filling the room with a faint, gentle glow. The boy lay in his bed, nervous, excited, biding his time. He waited until his eyes adjusted to the gloom, and then began to breathe in a long, gentle rhythm. He struggled, at first, to maintain his pace, his excitement getting the best of him, but he refused to give up. Time passed. The boy's breathing slowed, his eyes closed, and at the very moment of Morpheus's triumph, a subtle noise emanated from under the bed, the slow hiss of the creature. Scrapes and muffled echoes of movement greeted the boy, who dared not open his eyes. He heard it crawl out from the bed. The air moved around him, and he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand at attention. He lay limp, while his mattress shifted with the weight of the creature from under the bed, as it stood on too many limbs, straddling the boy, trapping him in place. He felt its hot, stinging breath upon his cheek. Sharp shards of hair brushed against his face as it rhythmically sniffed the air. Suddenly, the creature jumped off the bed and landed on the floor with a thud. The boy threw off his blankets and searched for it, but only caught a glimpse of a claw-like leg as it vanished into the shadow below the bed. Regretfully, the boy gave chase. He rolled from his bed and belly-crawled after the creature. Walls and warm carpet gave way to cold, damp stone, barely high enough to pass through, but he pressed on. He heard the creature in the distance, its hands slapping against the stone, its legs scraping along and pushing it forward. It shrieked with a voice like cold steel. The boy was gaining on it, grasping at the darkness ahead of him. Finally, the air changed. The echo wasn't quite so close. The air was colder. There was open space around him. He listened intently for the creature, but all he could hear was his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, far above, a bright light shone over the edge of a great cliff. Blinking back tears, the boy realized that this was no cavern nor pit. It was a canyon, and he had emerged at the bottom of it. There, Across the gray stone canyon floor, something shuddered and began to take shape. By the light of the moon, the boy finally saw the creature as it unfolded into its full height. Here the stranger paused, and for the briefest of moments, his eyes lost the ghastly stare that they held in perpetuity. My dear friend, there are things in existence that were never intended to be witnessed by the human eye. Things so alien, so bizarre, that the mind struggles to grasp for comparison. Failing comprehension, the witness slowly goes insane as the mind attempts to bury the memory of what it couldn't have seen by inventing lesser horrors. What I can tell you with certainty is that the boy saw a thing which was unafraid and which seemed to smile at him. The boy left that place, but he did not hurry. He felt no fear of the darkness ahead as he blindly crawled through it, nor any trepidation of what it could contain. He held no terror of the creature any longer, although he heard it scurrying close behind, patiently waiting when the boy sometimes lost his way. It no longer hid itself from the boy. It had no reason to. The boy crawled out from the darkness under his bed and carefully rolled between the covers. He didn't react when he felt something cold and clammy crawl into bed with him. He even took comfort from the soft hiss that filled the air and the gentle touch of the creature as it stroked his hair with its ragged limbs. In the morning, the boy awoke alone. The creature was nowhere to be seen. In a daze, unsure of what was real or nightmare, the boy went out into the dining room. His mother sat at the table, eating a simple breakfast. She looked up, smiled at him, and said good morning, but the boy did not respond. He didn't even look at her. He was too busy looking behind her, at the multi-jointed arm that went to a mouth, one of many, connected to a horror too real to exist. Quietly, it hissed. Michael watched the stranger's eyes. There, right in the pit of them, he thought he saw teeth flashing in the streetlight. The stranger swallowed in a dry throat, then continued. Time passed, but the creature became the boy's constant companion, always out of sight to anyone but him. Try as he might, tell who he might, nobody believed his ramblings, his story about his journey beneath the bed, nor that he could see the creature. But now, my dear friend, I have told you. You can believe it or not, as you will, but please, for your own sake. The stranger turned his eyes and, for the first time, met Michael's. With an absolute pleading in his voice, he continued, Don't look behind you. And with that, the stranger turned on his heels and slowly walked away. Michael waited there for several minutes, unsure of what to do. Then, feeling silly, he turned and went home. He arrived feeling ill at ease from his dealings with the stranger. The man was mad, that much was obvious, but Michael couldn't help but wonder at him. What kind of world would it be, he thought, to believe all of that, and know with absolute certainty that it was all real, to see what watched from behind people, and what lived under the bed. He got undressed and walked across the room to his bed, but stopped in mid-step. He turned to the mirror which sat above his dresser and stared at it, looking for what he knew couldn't possibly be there. He watched for several minutes while his heart pounded and every hair on his body stood on end. He had thought that, just for an instant, something had been watching him. Something that wanted to look like him, like his reflection, but had no humanity in its eyes or movement. And its teeth. Oh, its teeth. He shook his head to dislodge the sudden urge he felt to run. Then he took a deep breath and crawled between the sheets. As the minutes turned to hours, and he lay there still, unmoving but awake, he heard the faintest scratching coming from underneath his bed. Rats, he thought, as the scratching turned to a soft, rhythmic breathing. Very big rats. Even as he justified it to himself, and as a great many limbs curled around him in an embrace, he remembered the look in the crazed stranger's eyes, and the advice he had given him. Don't look. Okay, our next story is Finders Keepers. The image is of a semi-decayed skull of a raven. The bone is pure white, but the black beak is still attached. Some frayed feathers are still stuck to the beak. Ash poked her head out of the door and into the morning sun. Sure enough, her hungry friends sat in their usual spot atop a dead elm tree, waiting patiently for her to emerge. One of them signaled to the others, and a small murder of crows landed in the front of her yard. She smiled at them. "Good morning," she said, cheerfully. The one she thought of as Brutus cawed at her in reply. He was always the most vocal and the largest of the group, and demanded first taste of anything she gave them. Ash knelt down and opened her hands. Brutus glanced at her empty palms, but didn't stir. He tilted his head at her, and she smiled wider. "Very good," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out several unshelled peanuts. She piled 6 in one hand and 4 in the other, then closed her fists and made a few complicated movements in the air while the murder watched. Then she put her hands behind her back. "Okay," she said. "Choose." Brutus hopped forward and began pacing back and forth in front of Ash's knees. Finally, he stopped and gently nipped at her left knee. Ash laughed, delighted, and opened her left hand to reveal 6 peanuts. Brutus eyed the peanuts, then looked at her. He cawed when she refused to sit them on the ground. "It's okay, Brutus. I won't hurt you," she whispered. Brutus stared at her for a long moment, seeming to weigh his options. He walked over to her palm, still staring Ash in the eye. Then he quickly turned, grabbed a peanut, and hopped away. Ash laughed and placed the rest of her peanuts on the ground, including several more from her pockets. Brutus made a slight guttural noise to the rest of the murder, who happily fell upon the pile of nuts. Ash stood up and left them to their feast. She locked up her home and went into town. She went into a small grocery store, grabbed a handbasket, and started doing her shopping. "Can I help you find anything, miss?" a red-headed clerk asked as she paced up and down the aisles. "No, thanks," Ash replied. "I'll need eggs, heavy cream, vanilla," she thought, going through her mental checklist. "Nutmeg, butter, cinnamon, some twinkling fairy lights." She paused in the aisle, wondering where that last thought had come from. She shook her head and turned around, colliding with a man who was standing behind her. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said. The man, dressed in shades of black, made no reply. He only stared at her, expressionless. I didn't see you there," Ash continued. The man tilted his head at her, his eyes jotting to her basket, then back to her face. Ash slowly backed away from the man and carried on with her shopping. Every so often, she would stop and look around. only to see the same strange man peering around a corner at her. When she was finished, she went to the register and asked the clerk, "Do you have any idea who that man is?" "Which?" the clerk replied, looking around the room. Ash turned to point him out. He was standing, awkwardly, behind a stand selling various sauces. "That one," she said. The clerk shrugged. "Never seen him before," he said. "If he gives you any trouble, feel free to come back and I'll take care of it." Ash rolled her eyes. "Right, thanks." She packed her groceries into some bags and left. If the strange man followed her out, she never noticed him, so she returned home. She put her shopping down on the porch and looked for what was usually waiting for her. She was not disappointed. Neatly piled, exactly where she had left the peanuts, were several small items: an old coin, a bent screw, some tinsel, and a small, chopped-up strand of fairy lights. She smiled and looked to the top of the long-dead elm. Brutus stood in his usual spot, and Ash bowed to him. He cawed in response. Ash collected her treasures and went inside. As she was unpacking her shopping, she was surprised to find that a large knife had found its way into her bags. The next day, Ash poked her head out of the doorway to begin her morning feeding routine. She glanced up at the top of the elm tree, but Brutus wasn't there. Only 4 sets of black, beady eyes greeted her. "Brutus?" she called. She heard him caw, and he hopped out of the bushes below the elm tree. "What are you doing down there?" she asked, walking toward him. When she got closer, she understood. Brutus's wing was mangled and bent, broken back at an awkward, painful angle. Ash gasped and frowned. "You poor dear," she said, sitting down next to him. "What happened to you?" Brutus cawed at her and pecked at the bulge in her pockets. Ash sighed. Instead of making him work for it, she placed a small handful of peanuts directly in front of Brutus and another pile nearby for the other birds. The rest ate happily, but Brutus ate slowly, constantly glancing over his shoulder and into the street that ran by her house. An old black sedan sat there, its engine running. Ash hadn't thought anything of it at first, but the longer it lingered, the stranger it seemed. She got up and walked toward the car. As she approached, laughter erupted from the dark window, and it sped off down the road. Ash turned back to see Brutus standing next to her, silently staring at the retreating car. She smiled at him. Before the day was through, she had built Brutus a small covered box filled with papers and bits of ribbon, and left him to frolic in it while she made dinner. That night, while she was checking on Brutus, snug in his recovery nest, she spotted something where she had left the bird's food earlier in the day. She walked over, picked it up, and held it up to the light. It was a tooth, root and all, and it had been capped in gold. She looked back to Brutus, who made a happy, quiet noise, and nested deeper into the papers. The next morning started like any other day. Ash got up, got ready, and peered outside. But today there were no tiny eyes watching her, waiting for their breakfast. She searched the recovery box for Brutus, but he too was gone. Ash stifled a sob, wondering where her friends could be. They'd never missed a meal before, even going so far as to peck at her window if she slept in too late. She checked the tops of trees all around, but there wasn't a crow in sight. Grapes, she thought suddenly, remembering how much the murder loved them. She ran to the store in town, thinking that she might bribe them to return. Going inside, she approached the same red-headed clerk who was working the other day. "Excuse me," she started. "Do you have any fresh grapes?" The clerk turned, his cheek swollen and bruised. He thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. "I think we've got some in today," he said, locking out his register. "Follow me. You can have your pick of the bunch." Ash followed him to the back of the store and through a set of double doors leading to their loading dock and storage area. "Am I allowed back here?" she asked, startled at the dirty surroundings compared to the pristine and bright storefront. "Oh, sure, so long as I'm with you," the clerk replied and smiled. "Right over here. They just came in." He led her to an even darker area in the far corner of the building, and Ash looked around. "I don't see anything." "No, I guess you wouldn't," the clerk said, suddenly giggling to himself. "We don't get grapes in until next month." "What the hell?" Ash shouted. "Why would you waste my time like that?" He stared at her, his eyes wide. Did you like the knife?" he asked. "What?" The clerk burst into laughter. "Poor girl, all alone," the clerk said in a teasing tone, pulling a pistol from his pocket. Ash looked around the area for something to beat him senseless with, but there was nothing nearby. She was planning how to best attack with her bare hands when someone tackled the clerk from behind. The strange, black-clad man she had been followed by the other day stood up and kicked at the clerk on the ground with his heavy boots. The clerk scurried away and stood up. "You again!" he shouted. "Didn't you learn from the last time, you freak?" It was then that Ash noticed the strange man's mangled arm, twisted and broken, hanging at his side. The strange man glanced at Ash, then over at the gun, then back to her. Ash nodded. Together, they charged the clerk. The clerk raised his pistol and fired. The next day, Ash was lying in bed, still awake from the night before, staring at the ceiling. She had beaten the clerk's head into the concrete until he was senseless, perhaps dead. She hadn't asked when the police had finally told her that she could go home. She did wonder what had happened to the strange man who had helped her. He had been shot, she was sure of that, but the police said that nobody had checked into any hospitals or morgues with gunshot wounds. Maybe he was scared, she thought. But what of? She couldn't imagine. A tapping at her window startled her. She looked up and saw one of her crows sitting in the windowsill, eyeing her sideways. Ash smiled and nodded to the crow. She went outside with her usual pocket full of treats. The rest of the murder was present, but not Brutus. She sighed heavily, fearing the worst, but left the food for the others and watched them as they happily devoured it. A few hours later, she looked back at the spot she'd left the food. There she found a small string, a shiny pebble, a bullet casing, and the skull of a crow, cleaned and bleaching in the sun. Okay, and with that, we are done for the day. I would like to thank our interpreters for showing up and helping out with all of this. Just want to make sure that there aren't any questions I can answer. And looks like we're all set here. So, thank you everybody for tuning in. We will be back next week, same time, 1 p.m. West Coast, 4 p.m. East Coast, and 9 p.m. London time, I believe. So, have a good day. Everybody stay safe. And we will see you next week.